a roller. These create what I call positive marks. This is a foam roller. You can get these at Home Depot, but I actually think this one came out of my daughter's play box when she was about 7. And I've had it ever since, and it's probably like it comes off and it's not really that great anymore. But these make positive strokes. If you want to cover something up or you want to cover a lot of ground really quickly, they do really well in that way. So I'm going to take a little bit of this blue and green, put it together. Oh, throw it on. If I don't have paint all over me by the time this is over, I'm not doing something right. So you just sort of load it up like you would a roller that you would paint your wall with, and then decide where you want to go and just add it in. The wonderful thing about these is that they make softer lines. They make softer strokes. You don't get that. You see these paint stroke marks here and here and here. This is a completely different look, right? So you can add those in. A lot of times I like to add them if I'm trying to combine shapes or make shapes that are larger. If I've got a lot of small ones, like I tend to do at the beginning of paintings, I try to just add it in and incorporate some of these together.
So this is softer than the Bruyere? What is that?
Yes, the brayer.
Brayer.
I'm going to get to that in a second too. So that's what that does. It gives you this sort of soft feel, this kind of soft focus.
What do you mean by positive?
Positive. So it's putting the paint on, not taking it off, right? So for instance, the brayer, since we talked about it just a minute ago, this is a printmaking tool. It's on my list of tools, so hopefully you got one. If you didn't, you're welcome to borrow mine. They come in lots of different widths, so you can get them really wide, but I also have one that's only a half-inch wide. So lots of different ones. This is sort of medium, it's an inch and a half, and it's rubberized. It's used in printmaking, right? So if you are familiar with printmaking, you're putting the ink on and inking up your surface, that's what this is for. So for instance, it starts the same way as you would start a regular roller, but here's the difference. So if I decide that I want this area and I use a light touch, it's going to give me a positive mark, very similar to this one, right? But with the more weight that I put in my hand, it actually starts to take off some of that paint and press it in and thin it out so that you actually start to see the colors that are underneath. And when you use a brayer in this way, you don't have to worry about whether your paint that's going on is opaque or transparent. Because if it's opaque, like this one, the more weight that you put in your hand, the more, the thinner it becomes so that you can still see through it. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So this is how you use the brayer. If you want thicker areas, you can leave them thicker. Thinner areas, leave them go really hard on your brayering. That's how that works. So if you use a light touch, you're going to put it on in a positive way. If you use a heavy touch, you're actually pulling off the paint. So that's the difference there. So I'm going to take a little bit of this with the white. You don't have to load it completely also. So I'll show you a little trick. It's kind of interesting. So if I want this area to sort of be opaque, I can just keep it just like that. Now, if I only put a little bit of this on at a time, take a palette knife, I'll just use the same white that I got, add it on in little bits, and only once do I want to roll this down.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? The goal here is for your viewer to say, wow, that's such a cool mark. I wonder what made that. So it's that type of thing that you can try if you're looking for a little interest. You know, clearly I still don't know where this is going, but you get the idea. Palette
Do you
knife.
know where it's going at the beginning?
I never
Or is
know.
it in- okay.
Never know. Yeah, and
You think
sometimes
some
it's a
people
huge
do?
fail, and sometimes it works into something that I really like.
Yeah.
But it's hit and miss
Mm-hmm.
a lot. So I'll talk to you a little bit. Everybody familiar with the palette knife? A lot of people use it just to mix colors with. You know, it never leaves your palette. But I like it because it can just as easily make another mark that is interesting, depending on how you use it. If you want it to be a little thicker, you just place it and then lightly stroke over until you run out of paint, right? So this is really great because it gives you a sense of what we call visual texture, right? If once this is dry, I were to walk up to it and touch it, it's still pretty flat, but it could just as easily, depending on the application, it could just as easily be really thick. You can really put it on. Just remember that the thicker that you put it on, the longer it takes to dry, right? Okay. So that's the palette knife. Oh, wait. While I've got this on here and it's in a thicker sense, if I want to create a little different visual texture, while this is still wet, since it's on something that is much darker in value, I can stroke through it and reveal what's underneath, all right? That's kind of interesting, especially when you start to add more interest to the painting. This technique is called sgraffito. Anybody heard of it? It was made popular. It's an Italian term that has been used for centuries, but it was really made popular most recently by Richard Diebenkorn, who's responsible for those huge geometric kinds of paintings. The term means that you as a viewer are seeing what came before. You're seeing the thought process of the artist who created the work. A lot of times in Richard Diebenkorn's work, he would make long lines, and then he would decide, that's not where I want it. So he just covered them up and then sort of scratched through so that you could see. He thought about putting a line there, but then he covered it up, most of it. But there's that little bit that's still showing. It makes it interesting because it lends a sense of history to the painting. Okay, let me see what else. Palette knife. Okay, hotel key. How many of you have hotel keys that you get when you stay in places around wherever you are traveling? Right? They're awesome. Now, I'll show you how to use this, and then I'm going to tell you a story about these. You just sort of load your brush just like you would a palette knife. And if you want some interesting texture, you just put it down and drag it. All right? It's kind of interesting. The reason that I like it is because you can take this and use it with transparent paints, and it really does sort of help add another dimensional quality to the work. It doesn't cover everything up. You can still see it. And when this dries and I go over it with another transparent color, it's going to be even more interesting, right? So I'll just keep going. If you use these, you can get all kinds, you can get sort of jagged marks. You can get more definitive lines or boundaries. But I think that the more interesting thing is to make sure that if you're running with one of these horizontally, that you also find a way to do it vertically so that you're getting some interest in the work. It doesn't all go the same way. Because then somebody who's painted once or twice will go up and say, oh, isn't that cute? That was a hotel key, right? Key card. Now, how many of you, when you go traveling, do you check out and you leave these with the lady at the front desk or the man at the front desk?
I used to, not anymore.
Right? Don't ever do that. Two reasons why. One, these make great tools, and secondarily, but really more importantly, they have all of your credit card information on them. So if you ever have trouble with your credit card or somebody's hacked in or whatever, this is totally why. They're finding more and more, all of your credit card information is stored on these while you're staying there, and then anybody can just pick it up and read it if they have the right machine. So, good to know. Always
Thank you.
check out, but always keep these.
Yeah.
You can do the same with old credit cards if they go out of style or what have you. Other interesting tools. This you can get at Home Depot. It's a scraper tool. It is nothing too fancy, but it makes a nice, interesting mark. So I tend to like to have them in. I don't necessarily like them in that form because it's sort of, again, oh, they used a tool that made that nice mark because they're all uniform, right? So sometimes when I do it, I just sort of keep scraping through until I make something that I think is more interesting. We'll see. We'll see
Is
what happens.
this that one?
Yes, so
So
this
you put it,
made this mark, but it also made this mark. And these marks ended up looking like tree trunks to me for some reason, right? From a distance, maybe, I don't know. But that's what made those same marks.
and what is this called?
It's just a scraper tool that I got at Home Depot.
Maybe in the paint section.
In the paint section, yeah. And there's lots of them. There are ones that have little jagged teeth on them. These are flat. There are some that are longer, some that are more wide.